that big. So I took my son on a college visit the last couple of days. We left on Sunday. It was snowing, and then we come back to this. It was beautiful. It was just gorgeous, gorgeous. So, um, any prayer requests or anything before we get started? Anything that needs to be brought to the group, or absolutely, absolutely. I'm trying my best. They both tell me to keep off of the news, and it's very hard to stay away from it. So it's like when it's like candy. Like if you take a little bite, it's not that bad. Then you keep taking more little bites throughout the day. So um, the word from them is they're kind of bored, um, which is cool. Cool. If they're bored, I'm good. I'm completely fine. So all right, let us open with a word of prayer. God,
we do think it's beautiful weather for this Lenten season that's marching along. It feels like spring. So with the sense of renewal and things beginning to open up, the day is getting longer. We do pray that you will turn our hearts towards Easter and allow us to hear what you have to say for us through this season. We lift up our world. We lift up the Ukrainian people. We lift up just a situation that just dominates our thinking. And for me, my personal thoughts. We pray for peace. We pray for resolution. We pray that this story would come to an end as quickly as it possibly can. We pray for those that are struggling, for those that have lost loved ones, for those that are just in the midst of it. We would be a source of strength and comfort. So all this we pray in your name. Amen. I did find it ironic that we're in the midst of possibly World War III or whatever we're going to call it, and yet the Senate passed today a bill that would end daylight saving time. Did you guys hear this? Okay, like in the midst of all this, and then part of me, there's a very sarcastic part of me that's like, are you kidding? Like we're in the midst. Like I just could not see, FDR and Churchill worrying about things like that in 1939 and 40. But the other side of me is like, I'm overjoyed that we're going to end daylight saving time. I'm completely overjoyed because I'm still kind of like I'm tired from making up the hours. So whatever we want to say bad about our government, they put their differences aside today, hand in hand, across the aisle. We have ended this blight upon our culture called daylight saving. So I also learned that Arizona does not do daylight saving. Anyone know? That Arizona does not participate. And there's another part of the country that doesn't either, right? Hawaii doesn't do daylight saving. It's always sunny there. Who cares? Yeah. So, and then I did hear a news report that in the midst of all the craziness, that there's a Russian diplomat who has demanded the return of Alaska. And a town in California. So, apparently these are old treaties and old land claims and things like that. So, that's great. But, all right, we're in Luke chapter 12. Luke chapter 12. We ended this past Sunday. We were in Luke chapter 11, and we talked about the idea of prayer that Jesus is trying to get across. And then if you happen to tune into our Bible study video from yesterday, it was a brief one, but I tried to go through the rest of chapter 10 and chapter 11, getting us up to chapter 12 tonight. So we're Luke chapter 12. And I want to start off, this is going to date some of us, some of you. How many of you can remember when the Beatles came to America? Like, how many of you can remember those? Okay, this was a big to-do. So, how many of you watched that Ed Sullivan show? And how many, ladies, how many of you were one of these screaming, crazed, just yelling behind the barricade? Deb Jones, you were that person? Okay.
No, my mother made me turn it off because they were terrible that long hair.
From terrible long hair. They needed a haircut. All of that. Okay. I love documentary. I love historical documentaries, and I'll watch any documentary if it's good. So war documentaries, baseball, sports documentaries. One of the ones I'm always interested in. I love behind the scenes for bands like the Beatles and Rolling Stones, and what I'm always interested in is how they started, and if any of you are familiar with the Beatles story, obviously they come from Liverpool, England. There was one bandmate that was there at the beginning. For some reason he quit, and forever in infamy, like no one knows. He should have been one of the Beatles. Who their manager was at the beginning, and they signed with this person, and just all behind the scenes stuff. But eventually you get to a point in the documentary where you realize, like, hey, they're famous, and they're coming into these arenas. They start in England, and they come over here, and they're getting off the plane, and everybody's just losing their mind. Deb Jones is just losing your mind out on the tarmac or in the big, JFK Stadium and all that. You watch some of these, and everybody's just losing their mind. I mean, they're just absolutely losing their mind. And that was kind of it for the Beatles, for the Rolling Stones, for a lot of these bands. Even a band like the Monkees, which was a fake band, weren't even a real band. They eventually became a band, but you still would watch, they didn't know what to do. They would have just these thousands of people would show up in an arena and just yelling and screaming. The scene that we start with in Luke chapter 12, it's sort of that kind of scene that Luke is giving you sort of a behind the scenes look at what's going on. And we have said for a couple of, I say this frequently, but even a couple of times we've mentioned in this series, there was any given day, you had thousands of people following Jesus. On the low end, you had somewhere around 1,500 people. On the high end, you had crowds of 20, 25,000 people. When we think about the Jesus story, though, we sometimes, and perhaps you've seen this in movies and whatnot, we have this whole idea that there's just 25 of the most behaved people, and they're all just quiet and silent, and Jesus is just calmly standing on a big stone, and everybody's just very respectful, and they're all listening, no issues with the crowd whatsoever, and that's perhaps our image. And what Luke tells us at the beginning of this chapter is, no. In fact, some of this was pretty chaotic. And these disciples are probably just struggling. Just the whole idea that I'm exposed to thousands and thousands of people on a daily basis was probably very shocking for them. And they didn't have, even as chaotic as the Beatles coming in, at least you have police or barricades or some kind of crowd control. But in these this ancient times, it was just crazy. We have a picture in Luke chapter 9, where the feeding of the 5,000 takes place. Jesus asks the disciples for help in that. And then you return to this this scene in chapter 12, and again, sort of this behind the scenes look at what's going on. It says, meanwhile, when the crowd gathered by the thousands, so that they trampled on one another, he began to speak first to his disciples. Okay? So, that's just sort of a crazy thought. I mean, there's just so many people. There was probably people who were being trampled, probably not necessarily a safe thing. We don't know that Jesus had the singing voice of Paul McCartney, but there was this. Well, he's a miracle worker. He can heal. We've seen him do these things. We've heard him teach different things. He is, sort of this traveling roadshow. Not everyone was coming necessarily to hear what he had to say. They're probably coming to watch him do something, or for their own self-interest. They probably wanted to see something happen. I wanted to see something happen to me, or I brought somebody that I wanted to see something happen to them. So it sort of just creates this thing. What Jesus is trying to do, in a very interesting way, just sort of take this analogy a little bit further, it's almost like Jesus is about to step out on the stage. Okay? But behind the curtain he has his disciples. And there's probably this sense that he's looking at his disciples before the curtain is drawn back, and he probably sees these guys just with these huge eyes, like, what is this? Like, what have we gotten ourselves into? And we've seen that it's not just a one-time occurrence. We have this. We fed 5,000 people, which actually in all reality was probably about 25,000. We fed all these people. We've gone and we're healing people. We're getting sent to do things. They're probably a little freaked out, probably a little scared, or they're probably a little starstruck, or they might start letting this get to their head a little bit. Like, yeah, they're coming to watch us. They're coming to watch us. And it is almost like he has the curtain open, he's about to step out on stage, and he sees the disciples. Before I go out there, I need to talk to you guys. Just to reframe, just to make sure. Guys, listen, okay? Before we go any further, before we say anything, I want you to there's a couple of things I want to set straight with you. And this is where we sort of go in chapter 12. Jesus is going to say some very important things, but he's also going to say some things that are very, very stark. They're very hard. Some of them are even violent. Okay? He is not about to let the fact that all of these crowds are out here, Jesus is not letting that affect him. And he is not going to allow this to affect the disciples. And so, in a sense, he's trying to bring them back down to earth a little bit. And, while you think you have all these people looking at you or following us or whatever, you might think, hey, we're a big deal, we're famous and all that. There's actually some bad stuff that's about to happen. I'm going to try to ground you a little bit. I'm going to also make sure, hey, these crowds that are following us and love us today, these crowds are going to be the ones that eventually turn on us. They're eventually going to turn on me. And so it's in that context that we sort of start going through chapter 12. So he began to speak first to the disciples. Beware of the yeast of the Pharisees. That is their hypocrisy. Nothing is covered up that will not be uncovered, and nothing secret that will not become known. Therefore, whatever you have said in the dark will be heard in the light. Whatever you have whispered behind closed doors will be proclaimed from the housetops. That's an interesting teaching right out of the gate. We're right in front of we're talking about all these crowds. And Jesus he's first and foremost, the only other people that would have, not that they were rock stars by any stretch, but the only people that were known or or had notoriety would have been the religious officials. You know, if you were a Pharisee or a Sadducee, you were revered. There would be people that would follow you. There would be Pharisees that would have disciples. There would be people who would follow behind a certain Pharisees, and they would be taught. So they had a certain sense of notoriety. And again, as Jesus sort of facing these crowds, he turns and says, listen, I don't want you to fall prey to them. And what exactly are you talking about? They liked that. They liked that stuff. And it would be tempting if all of a sudden you had hundreds of people or thousands of people following you or watching you or anything like that. I'm always amazed. I don't get a whole lot of it. I'm right on the cusp of, like, I'm a techno person to a certain degree, but I'm quickly moving into the old-fashioned area. So I hope you've all left some room for me. Okay. But this this whole social like a TikTok. I don't know what a TikTok is. It's a little video, I guess. I've seen some ones that are funny. But you'll have these people who, like, girls, boys, like middle schoolers, and they'll have hundreds of followers, like hundreds of followers. And I think that's interesting or cool. And there's another part of me that's like, I'm not sure that's healthy. I'm not sure that is sort of the best thing. So I'm quickly in the when I was a kid, we watched this television kind of thing. But there is something that's sort of appealing. If you were to say something and all of a sudden thousands of people are attracted to that, there's sort of a stardom that is a very cool thing. And Jesus is warning against it very quickly. Do not fall into this. Do not fall into this. Because he said, therefore, whatever you've said in the dark, he says there is sort of a price. There's a price to fame. Okay, and we see this in political seasons, and it feels like we're in a political season all the time. Okay, we're already getting into election season. I think it's not a presidential election; it's going to be, midterms. And what happens? Everybody's horrible. Okay? Every candidate is horrible. And because there's people who have gone and they have dug up everything that they've ever done. And their opponent wants to make it out, you elect this person. It is like, there's nothing worse than this person. When they were in 5th grade, you know what they did in 5th grade? They stole so-and-so's lunch money in 5th grade. And it's just, do we want that kind of person leading us, especially in terms of the budget? No, we don't want that kind of person. So there's mudslinging and all of that, and Jesus is sort of making, like, if you step into this light, there's going to be a sense where people go, hey, everything you've said, everything you've done, people are going to come back to you and say, hey, aren't you Peter? Aren't you James? Or hey, I know who you are. I know what you did 3 years ago. I know your parents. Okay. Now, all of you who have grown up in Louisville, okay. Now, as I look out here. You're watching online, I'm looking at a room full of wonderful people. Spotless lambs are all right in front of me. No one in this room's ever done anything wrong, right? No. And there's no one in Louisville that could remember anything you've done, right? Correct? Or at least maybe they've moved away or whatever. Okay? The benefit of the small town and the curse of the small town is everybody knows you. And the curse is everybody knows you. They remember you when you grew up, or they remember what I remember that kid from high school, or what they did all those years ago. So Jesus is sort of making this point. Everything you've said and done is going to be heard. I mean, people are going to know who you are. So there's some warning there. It feels tempting. Don't give in to that. Don't give in to the idea, well, I have all these people following me. I have these, there's some notoriety, all of that. And Jesus is sort of warning against that. Then he goes into verse 4. Verse 4 is it goes in another different direction. Okay, the disciples, again, were sort of starstruck with everybody out here watching us. And then he continues. He says, I tell you, my friends, do not fear those who kill the body, and after that can do nothing more. What? Killing my body, that's a lot. That's a lot. Yes, I tell you, fear him. Are not 5 sparrows sold for 2 pennies? Yet not one of them is forgotten in God's sight, but even the hairs of your head are all counted. Do not be afraid. You are of more value than many sparrows. So he starts off with a very negative idea. Don't fear the person who can just kill you. Fear the person who can kill you and has control over your eternity. It's a very harsh idea. But he's talking about God. You can do what the Pharisees are doing, and this is a frequent thing that the Pharisees will bring up. Jesus will bring up about the Pharisees. They go out on the corner. Matthew does this in his gospel. That the Pharisees will go out on the corner. They will say long prayers. They will wear these certain outfits that they were called phylacteries. They would have certain tassels and certain religious beads, and they would have head coverings, and everybody would know when this person comes in, oh, that's the religious person. And Jesus would say, no, that person is getting their reward. They're not trying to be close to God. They're trying to stand on this corner and pray, and they're trying to get people to pay attention to them there. Like, oh, that's a holy person. Jesus said, they've already gotten their reward. And Jesus sort of building on that idea here. Do not fall in love with the fame or what can come with being popular. So he starts off with this sort of negative thing about talking about hell, but then he sort of switches gears right in the middle of this paragraph. Talk about, it's not that I don't want you to live in fear. I don't want you to think about God holding you over the cliff. This God loves you, and this God knows. Okay? There's nothing that has been hidden. This God knows the very hairs of your head. And some of us don't have that concern. But do not be afraid. You are more valued than many sparrows. So verse 8. And I tell you, everyone who acknowledges me before others, the Son of Man also will acknowledge before the angels of God. But whoever denies me before others will be denied for the angels of God. And everyone who speaks a word against the Son of Man will be forgiven. But whoever blasphemes against the Holy Spirit will not be forgiven. When they bring you before the synagogues, and what he's doing here in verse 11, again, what he's trying to do with these disciples, guys, listen, I just want you to know what we're seeing today with all these people watching us and everybody is clamoring for us. This is going to change. In fact, this is going to change in a few weeks. And once I'm gone, this is going to get perhaps even worse for you. Every single one of the disciples, Judas committed suicide, but each of the disciples except for John die a martyr's death. John's the only one that we think John dies of old age. We know he dies in prison. We're not sure. We don't know for sure whether he was killed. But every other disciple, history tells us that they were martyrs. And so this is where Jesus is sort of trying to prepare them for this. It says, when they bring you before the synagogues, the rulers and the authorities, do not worry about how you are to defend yourselves or what you are to say. The Holy Spirit will teach you at that very hour what you ought to say. So again, he is trying very hard to just keep them grounded. It's not about being famous. It's not about anything like that. You're going to be in a situation where you're going to be called upon to defend your faith. You're going to be called upon to be a witness. He's basically saying, I just want you to, your job in being a witness is just simply tell what you have seen, what you have experienced. So later on, in the beginning of the book of Acts, Jesus uses a term. He uses the term witnesses. And he will sort of elaborate that later. But the basic idea of a witness is just tell people what you went through. Just tell people what you went through. And this is really what Luke is trying to do. Luke's whole gospel, what Luke is trying to accomplish in his gospel is amazing. When He starts at the very beginning of the book of Luke. You don't need to turn there. But in the very first chapter of Luke chapter 1, says, "See, many have set down an orderly account of the events that have been fulfilled among us, just as they were handed on to us by those from the beginning, were eyewitnesses and servants of the word. I too decided, after investigating everything carefully from the very first, to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus, that you might know the truth concerning the things about which you have been instructed." That's the way that Luke begins his gospel. And what he's preparing them for is that's what you're going to do. Part of what you're going to do in the future is you're going to tell this story. You don't need to know all of the theological answers. You don't need to know what is the Trinity and how does the Trinity work, and what's the connection between the Old Testament and the New Testament. What about Adam and Eve? And did they have belly buttons? And how long was the creation week? And where's Noah's Ark and all that? What Jesus is sort of saying, look, listen, no, I just want you to be witnesses. I just want you to tell people, what did you see? What did you hear? What did you experience? What did you go through? So he's sort of preparing them for that. Now, verse 13, someone in the crowd said to him, and this is one of the things that happens to Jesus frequently. People would come to Jesus, and I get this a lot. I will get, I don't get it a whole lot anymore, but every once in a while, people, when I am, sometimes I'll get it in my office, but most of the time it's from a stranger. It's called I call it the pastor question. And I almost hesitate. I never want to not tell people that I'm a minister. So I always have to be careful. But as soon as I say I'm a minister, I've always had this question. Okay? I've always had this question. And they want to go, and it's an elevator question. They think it's going to be this little thing. We're just going up to the 10th floor. I'm so, world religions. What's going on? And I'm like, dude, I'm not going to get, there's no quick answer to that. But Jesus would often get, they're called almost like, the term is called myopic meandering, where I'm going to try to give you this scenario, and people will try to come up with a scenario. They want to know an answer for themselves, but they kind of pose a situation. What about the person? There was a kid who grew up on an island all by himself, and he dies. Where does he go? And that's their philosophical question. The reality is they don't really want to know about the child who grew up on the island all by himself and never heard the word Jesus. What they really want to know is they want to know if they are okay. So I try to I don't know about that person, but what about you? What about you? What about your situation? But Jesus would be confronted with these scenarios. And so sometimes the Pharisees would be seen as judges if you didn't have access. You really didn't have lawyers that people had access to. There were lawyers in the Bible, but most of them were just religious leaders. They were lawyers in terms of religious law. There wasn't you could go to this, a court or anything. You would have to go through, usually it was a bribe. You would go to a magistrate, you would go to a Roman guard or something like that. And the whole thing of justice was very basic. If I could afford to pay off, that was the way most cases were decided. It was very rarely you heard, well, I have a good case, I know what's right. No, you just would pay for it. And so they would ask the religious leaders, and they would get an answer that would usually satisfy them. So in verse 13, it says, someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me." He said to him, "Friend, who set me to be a judge or arbiter over you?" So Jesus is rejecting this. Partly, it's probably out of annoyance. You could spend all day doing this. You could spend all day. And that was, the example, if you look back in the book of Deuteronomy, this was one of the roles of Moses. That he would spend his day, eventually it was Moses' father-in-law who came and said, "You can't do this all the time. You need to get some help. You need to get 70 people, they can help be the judges and things like that. But Jesus knows right out of the gate, I could do this all day long. I'm not here for this. I'm not here to do this. So he says, friend, who set me to be a judge or arbiter over you? And he said to them, take care, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. For one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. Then he told them a parable. The land of a rich man produced abundantly. And he thought to himself, what should I do, for I have no place to store my crops? Then he said, I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build larger ones. And there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry. But God said to him, you fool, this very night your life is being demanded of you. And the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich toward God. Now, there's a verse to circle here. It's verse 21. So it's those who store up treasure for themselves, but are not rich toward God. Now, what he's doing, this is sort of it's one of the ingenious things that Jesus does. He will say things to the crowd. Okay? And parables were easy things to tell the crowd. We love stories. And if I start telling a story, man, everybody gets quiet. And everybody leans in a little bit more. And if you have a really good storyteller, you can just sort of get them. Okay? You were a kid, if there was like the youth leader or the scout leader who was telling the story at the fire. Okay? They're telling you a ghost story or something like that. They get you right and you're like, whoa, what happened? Okay? We love story. It is one of the things that is powerful. And, I can't remember a bunch of facts from school, but I can remember stories. That's why I love history. Can you name all the capitals of every state? No, but I can tell you stories from the American Revolution. I can tell you stories from church history, all that. We like the idea of story. And so Jesus would do this thing where he would preach he would tell these stories to the disciples, and the disciples were sort of behind him, and they would listen to these stories, and they would try their best to absorb them. And he would tell these things to the crowd, and then he would turn back to the disciples and make sure they knew what was going on. Like he would make sure that they understood. And oftentimes the disciples did not understand. Or they would sort of put themselves like, yeah, we know what's going on. Because they didn't want to look like they didn't know. Because when they're in front of the people, like, yeah, we're with him. And, yeah, we know what he said. But once Jesus sort of got with them, eventually, like, oh, what did that mean? What exactly did that mean? Jesus would often not give the interpretation to the crowds. He would save that interpretation for the disciples. But he's using this, he's using this, I want to change the way that you think. And so he uses this weird question, this, teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance. And Jesus is like, you know what, this is not why I'm here. This is not why I'm here. I'm here to bring your focus off of the immediate, and I want to pull your focus to more of a kingdom way of thinking. So he turns back to the disciples. Well, in verse 21, he says, so it is with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich toward God. That is a very interesting phrase, the idea of being rich toward God. Many of us, I would say that sort of the easiest way to understand is really a quick question. Are you rich toward God, or are you poor towards God? And just thinking about that for a second. Am I can be rich towards a bunch of stuff. Okay? I have resources. And I use my resources in a number of ways. Now, unfortunately, I have been very rich towards the gas pump in the last 3 weeks. Man, I have been very rich towards the gas. Okay, man, they're taking all my money. You would think I'm a millionaire the way I'm spending money at the gas pump. I really don't have that money, but you would think it. We all think it. Like, man, somehow I can spend $100 on gas, and I wasn't able to do that 3 weeks ago, but now I can. I can do that. I can be rich towards a lot of things in my life. If there's a hobby, or if I'm a collector, car collector or art collector or something like that, I can be rich towards those things. If you have something that is very exciting to you, there's a way that you will find money for that. Okay? I can be broke, but if a superhero movie comes out, I find $15. I will find, somewhere, somehow, I found $15. And if you ask me the week before, oh man, I'm sorry, I got nothing. I'm broke. Okay? But if the Marvel movie comes out, oh man. So we went to go see Batman the other day. It wasn't that good, but I was disappointed. But I still had to go see it. You had to get the ticket, you had to get the popcorn, you had to get all that stuff. And the question is, so it is with those who store up treasures for themselves but are not rich towards God. You are either rich towards yourself or you're rich towards God. So you think about your resources, you think about the things that you have. It's not to say, well, I'm greedy, or I'm selfish, or I'm a miser, or anything like that. No, it's just kind of simple. You're either rich towards yourself or you're rich towards God. And when God comes to us, which God does frequently, and says, hey, you need to do this, you need to give this, you need to share this. All of a sudden, oh Lord, I wish I had more. I wish I had more to give. I wish I had more. Man, if I had $1 million, if I win the lottery, that's what I always say. If I win the lottery, oh man, I'd help everybody. I'll go give it to all homeless people, and I'll give it to all these charities, things like that. And that may be the case. But the idea is, like, you don't need to, if you say, I'm going to wait till I get the lottery winnings before I give to this charity that I know needs my help, you're being rich toward yourself. You're not really being rich towards God. And you're simply like, hey, where is my giving level at? You're not giving to get. Jesus is making it clear, when he tells this parable, he makes it sound so bad. Okay? But we do this all the time. Okay? I don't have barns that I tear down and build new barns so I can put my grain in. But I've got stuff. So like in spring, I love to clean things out. And I love to go into the closet, and I realize I have a lot of coats. I have a lot of shoes. I have a lot of shirts. And I do this sort of thing. Have I worn this shirt in the last year? Have I worn this shirt in the last year? If you can't say I wore this shirt in the last year, I try to get rid of it. But I realize I can go through I have stuff in my house. Does anybody else have stuff? Anybody else have stuff? Okay. And, someone once told me, he said, if you hold a piece of clothing and it does not bring you joy to put that piece of clothing on, you should get rid of it. You should completely get rid of it. And not just to unload stuff, but to be generous. And so this parable, he says, well, listen, I have all this grain. I'm not going to, I don't know what to do with it. I'm just going to build bigger barns. And we look at this like, you obviously should just give it away. You're just one person. How much food do you need? And that's sort of the image. Like, we have all these silos. If you're riding around in Louisville, you're not going to go far without seeing a farm. Think about all those silos. There's one person. Okay? One person has silos in barns full of grain. And this one person's like, I need more barns. I need more barns. And it's just sort of overwhelming. So, he continues in verse 22. He says, therefore I tell you, said to his disciples, therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will wear. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothing. Consider the ravens, they neither sow nor reap, They have neither storehouse nor barn, and yet God feeds them. Of how much more value are you than the birds? And can any of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your span of life? If then you are not able to do so small a thing as that, why do you worry about the rest? Consider the lilies, how they grow. They neither toil or spin. So even as I'm reading this, what I come to this passage, this helps me relax. This passage, if you just sort of let this passage, and there's a similar passage in Matthew, but it's just like, just think about all the stuff you're worried about for a second. I'll start over. Just think about all the stuff you're worried about. As I'm reading this, I just want you to sort of let all that go. Okay, just think about all the stuff you're worried about, let it go. It says, therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will wear. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothing. Consider the ravens. They neither sow nor reap. They have neither storehouse nor barn, and yet God feeds them. Of how much more value are you than the birds? Can any of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your span of life? If then you are not able to do so small a thing as that, why do you worry about the rest? Consider the lilies, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. Yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not clothed like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass of the field, which is alive today and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, how much more will he clothe you, you of little faith? And do not keep striving for what you are to eat and what you are to drink, and do not keep worrying, for it is the nations of the world that strive after all these things, and your Father knows that you need them. Instead, strive for the kingdom, and these things will be given to you as well. Wow. It's just so relaxing. Think about all the stuff you're worried about. Do what? It could. I mean, yeah. So the initial thought is, yeah, let's just sell everything and we'll move into a commune. You know, we'll all go back to Woodstock and just hang out. What I think he is saying is like it's. I mean, some of it's hyperbole, some of it's literal as well. Like the idea where he says, how many of you can add a single hour to your life? Like we worry about our lives. We worry, you know. Every time I turn on the news, even though I'm trying to, you know, I tell myself, well, I'm just trying to keep track of war, and I'm trying to keep track of my sons and all that. The news is designed for one thing. It's designed to make me scared. It's designed to make me scared. And what it's also designed to do, there's fear, but then there's no relief. And so the way the news works is that you listen, and you listen more because you think, well, if I listen for 5 minutes more, the relief for what I'm afraid of, that's going to come. And it never does. It never does. So I keep listening for 15 minutes, 20 minutes, half hour, an hour, and I realize, no, they're just making me more worried. They're making me more worried. And so when the news says, oh my gosh, this could lead to World War III. And this could lead to nuclear war. What that does internally to all of us, like, oh my gosh, I don't want nuclear war. Like, I don't want to die. I don't want my family to die. I don't want to die. And I'm really worried. And so what I think is I need to swing towards a politician or a political party or you know whatever the newscaster says. I need to swing towards that. That's going to relieve. They have the answer. And so depending on what station you're watching, you know, they're all blaming each other. And so these folks go, well, this is what the problem is. These folks are doing this, and these folks are doing that. And we think that's the answer. And so we're pulled into that. You're pulled into that thinking, yeah, if we get the right person in office or get the right person out of office or if this party makes their agenda work and all that. Jesus is making very silly. No, that's going to work. No, that's going to work. Yes.
Just a little bit beyond that, I think if you take that literal, somewhere God tells you better produce something, you can't stop producing.
Right now.
And I remember somewhere reading that the Jewish people went whole hog in this and ran out of money because nobody, they just.
There was when Paul was writing to, I think it was the Galatians. There were some that had stopped working, and it was the Thessalonians, the Thessalonian church. Paul writes some specific things like tell the guys who are stopping working they can't. And there was a belief. There was a real belief, like, hey, Jesus is coming back any moment. Why do I need to work? Okay? Because if Jesus comes back tomorrow, I don't need to go to work. And then finally Paul says, no, you have to go to work. You have to work. Now, this gets even more fun, more literal. So, verse 32, and we'll close on that. Verse 32, do not be afraid, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. I don't know if you want to take this literal or not, Jim. Sell your possessions and give alms. Make purses for yourselves that do not wear out, an unfailing treasure in heaven, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. That's interesting. I don't know if you should take that literal or not.
It's great, but don't be stupid.
No, I think, it's whether or not you're going to be dominated by your possessions, or your self-worth is going to be determined by your possessions. If you're going to measure your life on what you have, or how much you've saved, or anything like that, you want to be able to say on some level, I have stored up treasures for myself in heaven. Now, does that mean that I go be destitute? So, here's the scenario. Listen, all the money I get, I've given it away. Then I show up to you guys and say, hey, I ain't got no money. Can y'all give me food? Like, dude, you got paid. Like, why don't you take some money that you got paid with and go buy food? So there is a sense of stewardship. There are people throughout history that have taken this very literally, and they've given it all away. There are monks and nuns take this very literally. Like they have taken vows of poverty, and they like listen. I'm not going to have an income. And what's interesting, so I do my taxes, and ministers' taxes are beyond bizarre. We all dread taxes, but my taxes, there are so many rules that are just different for ministers. And there's a whole section, there's like a whole book that you go through, and there's a whole section in the tax and legal code that is designed for ministers, for clergy, but there's a whole other thing just for monks and priests and nuns. That basically, if you've taken a vow of poverty, how do you do the taxes? Because they still they get paid. They kind of get paid, but they kind of give it right back. So there's still a taxable income that comes from that. Well, I've taken a vow of poverty, but they still get paid. So they have to figure this out. So you can take it to that literal thing. The idea is don't let your possessions own you. Don't let your possessions own you. If God says to you, hey, I want you to go do something. This is what I want you to do. I want you to go, I want you to travel. I want you to go be a missionary. I want you to give up and go do something else. There are some people who say, well, I can't. I got stuff here. I have stuff. I can't do that. The other idea is I am making this an express. I'm doing this for a reason. I think I'm doing it for a reason. So there was a Christian artist. His name was Rich Mullins, and number of songs that you would know them if you heard them. And he wrote this story. It was an interesting thing. When he was young, he was sort of like, you don't remember the Jesus people, from the 60s. Some of you may have been, there was a sort of a movement. We're just going to live in poverty. We're going to get a van. We're going to paint flowers on it. We're just going to go, follow the Grateful Dead or whatever. But Rich Mullins, he was like, you know what? He was a musician. He was making money as a Christian musician, and he got to a point where he I didn't want to go into the crowds. And, I don't want to be famous. I'm going to quit, and I'm just going to go live off the grid. I'm just going to go buy a cabin, live off the grid, and that way I'm not going to give in to greed. I'm not going to give in to possessions. And he said his dad came back to him and said, Rich, I want you to think about this. He said, you can go do that if you want. I'm not sure how much impact you're going to have. What his dad challenged him to do was, I want you to make as much money as you possibly can. Make as much as you possibly can. But you do it with the purpose of, this is what I'm doing with it. I have the ability to generate all of these funds. And he has a number of ministries that he basically funded out of his music ministry. Okay? Now, not every Christian artist does that. Okay? There's a lot of musicians that they're just making money. Okay? But I would say, for him and probably for hopefully a lot more, they use that to say, okay, I'm going to take care of my stuff, but everything that I'm using it to further God's kingdom. That's the idea. Is that I'm going to not let this stuff keep me capped. Is that helpful? Are you worried about all the millions you're not sure what to do with all your millions? Okay.
If somebody's not careful, they can take that and.
Yes. Well, you can take all of it, so there are times Jesus will speak in parable and hyperbole to make a point. When Jesus says, if your right eye betrays you, if you're looking at something you're not supposed to look at, you should put your eye out. If your left hand is doing stuff wrong, you should cut your hand off. That's hyperbole, okay? I don't want anybody coming into church next week and they got a patch on their eye like a pirate and they're missing their left arm. I don't want to see that. Why did you do that? Well, I'm just reading the Bible. Okay? No. It's an overstatement that Jesus is making to make a point. That's what he's doing with these parables. Every one of Jesus' parables, they're powerful. They're almost too far. They almost go too far. So on Sunday, we're gonna look at Luke chapter 15. And in that chapter, there's 3 parables. There's the parable of the lost sheep, the lost coin, and the prodigal son. They're completely over the top. A man has 100 sheep, he loses one. What do you think he should do? Well, he leaves the 99 sheep and he goes looks for the one. Okay? Most shepherds are like, I'm not going to do that. It's just a dumb sheep. They got lost. Okay? There's a lady, she has 10 coins. She loses one of them. She spends all day looking for the coin. She finds it, then she throws a party. Okay? Now, I have not been to a found coin party. No one's ever invited me to one of those. But people are like, why are we here? Why is this music so loud? This is great. She's got food. She's got hors d'oeuvres. Why are we here? I found my coin. Is that your birthday? No. Did anybody retire? No. Somebody graduate? No. Why are you having this party? I found my coin. Okay, I'll eat the chips and salsa. This is great. It's exciting. But he's just making it over. This woman is so excited that she found something. And then we get to the prodigal son. We're going to spend most of our time there on Sunday. There are some things like that. There are things that the first son does that are over the top. There are things that the second son and the father do that are over the top. So we'll look at all of that on Sunday morning. But Jesus uses these to make a point. He wants you to walk away from these passages getting it. So when he tells the story, hey, there's this man, and he tears down his barns and builds bigger barns. And the fact is, he dies that night. It's horrible. This guy, he just finished his new barns, put all his grain in his new barns, and then he dies. So, did that really happen? Is there a dude who did this? We're not sure. We're not sure that Jesus is talking about a historical person. But he's saying it to make the point. I want you to understand what I'm trying to say, the point that I'm trying to get across. All right. Oh, I went 5 minutes over. Thank you. Let's close in prayer. God, we thank you for what you're challenging us to do and how to think in your word. We thank you for this chapter. We thank you for the whole book of Luke, and that you are pushing us in different areas. You're pushing us to think. You're pushing us to examine. God, may we not worry. May we not be anxious. May we not try to add an hour to our life to worry about the things that we have or don't have, or the things that are beyond our control. God, it is my prayer, it is our pursuit that we would put our lives in your hands. You know where the life that you've given us is going, and we simply want to follow you. Now, when we are called to be witnesses for you, that we would truly be able to tell people, this is who you are, this is what you've done in our life. And all this